Welcome everyone to 2020 Business of Outdoor Recreation Summit. We're happy to have you. It's been a pleasure partnering with Rachel Schmidt over at the Governor's Office of Outdoor Recreation. And also this year we partnered with Bob Walker with Montana Trails Coalition. So that's been a fun partnership for this year. Thank you so much for pivoting. We had hoped to have it in person and did a lot of magic to get the virtual to work. Lots of shifting, so happy to have you. Some quick housekeeping. Calvin and myself, so you'll see Calvin's little bubble and mine. We'll be working behind the scenes, so I'll eventually turn off my microphone and my camera. So if you have any questions to ask us directly, just find us in the chat box and you can send us to that. Other than that, we absolutely would love to have you submit any questions you have for the panelists, any resources that you might want to share. Put that in the chat box and make sure that's going out to everyone. And if it's resources, I'll go ahead and copy and paste it and put it on a resource handout. The resource handout will be uploaded to this session on Whova. So if you go to this session under handouts, it'll be there. As far as that, everyone, just make sure your microphone is muted during the presentation and discussion portion, and then we'll get to the Q&A section of this presentation. And depending how big the group is or what makes the most sense, we might open up your microphone, but absolutely as this conversation goes through till 2:45, go ahead and submit your questions in the chat box just so we can keep track of them. And then Steve is our moderator, so he'll be able to reference them throughout or towards the end so he can pose those questions to the group. Other than that, I think that is it, and I will hand it over to Steve, who's moderating this. So thank you, we appreciate and enjoy.
Thank you, Sheena, and welcome everyone to the live panel, Commercial Recreation Licensing and Permitting Now and in the Future. My name is Steve Gallus. I live in Helena. And I think I have a pretty interesting background into our topic today in that by no design whatsoever, but by fate, I've had the luck to experience commercial outdoor recreation from a multitude of angles. One being a fly fishing guide on the Big Hole and Beaverhead area mostly, running a fly fishing lodge in Wise River, Montana. I also had the opportunity to serve in both our state house and state senate for 14 years, where I was on the Fish and Game Committee for 12 of those years and dealt with the public policy issues associated with fish, game, recreation, fishing, hunting, and you know, the reason why most of us love this snow in October. Currently, I work for the Department of Labor. I'm the executive officer tied to the Montana Board of Outfitters. So I'm learning and have learned the commercial permitting, licensing, and you know, the government side of regulation of this professional license. And so it's kind of, I like to refer to it as maybe the three legs of the stool. I'm you know, deeply interested and passionate about all aspects that we will be discussing today, and I'm very honored that I was asked to moderate this panel. With that, I would like to introduce our panel members and let them identify them and let them introduce themselves. And I'd like to start with Rich.
Hi, Steve, can you hit the record button real quick? I apologize.
Absolutely.
So towards the bottom.
I just saw it, so I'm sorry, Sheena said, do you want to stop? So I thought it was hit.
Oh, don't stop it then.
Okay. So are we good to go technically? Okay.
Yes, sorry about
All right.
that.
So I'll introduce Rich, and he can go ahead and tell us a little bit about himself.
Thank you. Rich Janssen. I had been born in Bozeman, raised in Ronan, Montana. Went to school in Ronan, got my forestry degree from the University of Montana in 1993, and then decided to get a master's in business from Gonzaga in 2007. I've been where I am an enrolled member of the Salish Kootenai tribes here in Western Montana, and I've been with the tribes ever since I got out of college. I've spent 25 years of my career here, the last 20 being in natural resources, where I oversee at full staff 202 individuals, employees of 3 distinct divisions, all the way from environmental protection to fish and wildlife to water quality, water rights, roads, safety of dams, etc. A multitude of arenas that I work with. So happy to be here, and thank you.
Oh, we're happy to have you. And next up, I would ask Lori to tell us a little about herself.
Thank you, Steve. My name is Lori Thomason, and I am the Executive Director of the Outfitters and Guides Licensing Board. I've been with the licensing board for going on 15 years now. We have 6 actually total employees in our agency, and we oversee the whole state. Born and raised in Idaho, and actually have never had any intentions of leaving. Idaho's a great state. Done a lot of outdoor activities, horses, motorcycles, you name it. Love the outdoors, and also understand through many years of paying attention to the state's natural resources, just how, as this director, I can help with the state's resources and making sure that we monitor them and understanding how important it is to do such. And so that's about all I have for me today. Thank you.
Oh, thank you very much, Lori. And next up, we have Mike.
Steve, thank you. My name is Mike Bias. I'm currently Executive Director of the Fishing Outfitters Association of Montana. Fishing Outfitters Association has nearly 900 members now, about 500 guides, and 400 or so outfitters, licensed outfitters in the state of Montana. I've been doing this for almost 4 years now. Prior to that, I was executive director of the Big Old River Foundation. It's kind of interesting. I have mostly an ecological, I'm a research ecologist background. And then when I left the Big Old River Foundation, I guess kind of unknowing to me, I jumped more into the politics. But we do have, the Fishing Outfitters Association of Montana has a big conservation arm. We run a 501c3 called the Conservation Fund, and where we fund conservation projects, but also environmental education. And one of our big projects there is Guiding for the Future, where we run an advanced guide training program for 3-year or more guides. So guides with a little more experience than brand new guides, and then try and teach them the stewardship environmental aspects of guiding to, you know, they're the stewards of their resource, and the more they know about being a steward, the more they can impart that to their clients. So that's what I do. I'm happy to be here. Thanks, Steve.
Thank you. And next up is Jeff.
Yeah, hello everyone. I'm Jeff Ward. I'm the Regional Recreation Business Program Manager with U.S. Forest Service, the regional headquarters here in Missoula. And I'm very excited to be joining this group. I've been overseeing the Rec Special Uses Program along with a myriad of other rec programs in the region since I moved up from Utah in 2013. So just about 7 years. And it's been, I've slowly shifted more and more into the rec special uses, A, by choice, and B, by the demand. And, you know, I think that's a lot of what we're going to talk about today. I, not quite like Steve, but have a little bit of a slightly different background than I think some of my regional counterparts, and that I've only been full-time with the Forest Service since 2010. Prior to that, I was an executive director with a nonprofit agency, and for many years before that, in the private sector doing natural resource environmental consulting. But from the very beginning, I actually always wanted to work for the Forest Service. So I'm happy to be doing what I'm doing. I've had some unique experiences with the Forest Service. As far as last year, I was able to spend a detail with the Washington office in rec special uses, which was interesting to say the least, but it was very useful. And also to do an international assignment in Brazil on public use management. So yeah, I'm excited to be here.
Thank you, Jeff. And our last panelist to introduce would be Donna.
Better unmute myself. Thanks, Steve, and thanks for inviting me. I've been a licensed outfitter, both hunting and fishing here in the state of Montana for over 30 years. I've been fortunate to be on the same ranch my grandfather homesteaded in 1910. And right now, out of 5 generations, 4 of the generations live here on the ranch. We all, of course, love the outdoors. We love sharing it. And I've had a passion to protect it. And I've been on the governor's public land, private wildlife. I've been president of the Outfitters Association for the Montana Outfitters and Guides. I was on the board for America Outdoors, which protects recreation across the country. And currently I'm on the board for the Rocky Mountain Elk Foundation. So not only do I have a passion for what I do, I have a passion to help protect it and share it with others. So I'm really excited to be on this board because a lot of it, as we move forward and we're sharing the resources, it's good to see all these people involved. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much. And thank everyone for taking the time today to participate in this discussion. I think it should be a good one. I did, just so everyone listening in knows, I have, you know, prepped for this meeting and emailed out a couple of questions to help guide us. But what I really hope to do today is maybe start off with one of those and just let panelists jump in if they have input, and not really go name by name and ask everyone to respond directly to, and start that discussion. And I might have some additional backup questions just to spur some conversation. And please, if you have any questions of me at any point during the discussion, please shoot. And also we have the text option. If you see something that you would like to be brought up or pointed out, please just go ahead and text or let me know, voice, and we'll make sure we incorporate. And with that, I guess I'll just start with one of the first questions as we're having this discussion about the realities of our current permitting and licensing system, and discussion of balance and stewardship and proactive efforts for the future. Montana and other jurisdictions have a unique licensing systems depending on where we are, and they involve multiple agencies responsible for land, wildlife, resources, and public safety. Can you suggest any concepts that would elevate communication and develop more global and agile multi-agency systems that could benefit balanced use and stewardship? And it's open to anyone.
Well, I'll jump in, Steve. You know, we deal with many different agencies. Personally, I'll deal with 7 to 8 different agencies, both nationally and locally and statewide. And so when you're dealing with all these different agencies, it would be nice if somehow we could come together, united, put our egos aside, and sit down at the table and actually, I think, sit around a campfire outside where we're protecting, we're out there where we want to protect what we're doing, and discuss the different goals of the different agencies and how we as users on the ground can help accomplish those goals. It's very difficult as a user of the different resources to have so many different rules put down on us, where sometimes the right hand doesn't know what the left hand's doing, and it becomes a juggling act. So to sit around a campfire, to sit around a table, to discuss these issues, and we can move forward more united and get things accomplished.
Excellent. Does anyone else have ideas, concept, input?
Steve, this is Lori. I am wondering if in Montana you have MOUs between the Forest Service, Fish and Game, BLM. We have a Department of Lands that help pull all the information together. Our outfitters are licensed based on being permitted as well. And so we work hand in hand, and I'm not sure how Montana works, but we work hand in hand and develop a process with each one of those agencies so that if there's a new outfitter or an outfitter purchasing a business, the process is the same. We work, like I said, collaboratively with them. One won't do one without the other, and so it comes together in the middle. But you know, I'm looking for, is that how you operate in Montana with your federal agencies?
And I can let others speak, Lori, but I can speak just for the board. We do utilize MOUs, but traditionally they're I would say they're non-global, and they're more like a bicycle wheel with spokes. If the board is the hub and they sign an individual MOU with various land grant agencies or wildlife management agencies, and sometimes they're sometimes that can create a short of what I would describe as a disconnect, but not the congruency that Donna maybe just had spoke to, that the collaboration of those agencies and the board kind of working on the same table could be beneficial to all. And right now let me just say, I personally believe that there's room for improvement in communication.
I'll jump in on that as well. I see Mike is kind of anxious, and I love hearing from the outfitters folks, especially because you know, being in the agency with Forest Service, I certainly realize our issues and complications and frustrations. And Lori, just to touch on yours, obviously I work with you because my region covers everything from northern Idaho to North Dakota and everything in between. And it varies quite a bit. And it's taken me a while to learn how Idaho works versus Montana. We're working on needing to update our MOU with Montana, but it's very different than what we have with Idaho as far as the communication. It's almost more of a, I would say, when it gets to more of a regulatory issue, not as much as that, you know, even from the very upfront or any issues. I think I shouldn't say that, but it is different. And I do think there's room for improvement. And on, you know, a lot of it is, I will admit, internally. It's, you know, there's one of the more common things we hear is what Donna mentioned, is maybe not even cross agency. We see it just across forest boundaries, and we know what those lines are. However, you know, it doesn't matter to the public or the outfitters generally, whether you're on the Beaverhead Deer Lodge or the Custer Gallatin or the Helena Lewis and Clark. But even across those boundaries, it can be a little different. We have had some good examples of trying to build some more consistencies as far as we have the Bob Marshall Wilderness Complex, or Management Complex, which includes, you know, the Lolo, Flathead, Helena Lewis and Clark, and they operate as one kind of congruent complex. And I think there's some good lessons to learn from that as well. So, you know, and then on top of that, nationally, it's been recognized and very well address, we know that we have some issues, and we've spent the last several years trying to do some special use modernization, and that's across the board, not just outfitter and guides. It's everything lands and recreation special uses. It's slow moving. There's no question about it, but I do see some improvements, and I actually feel like we're getting closer and closer to some implementation of some of those, but I don't want to take up too much time, so I'll save some more for later.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Who else?
Yeah, Jeff, thanks. My experience from, I'm an outfitter myself, and I'm a guide in Idaho, so it's kind of fun going crossing state lines and things like that. But from my experience as an outfitter, and most recently, I guess it's just within the state, is the way Montana operates. We're licensed under the Board of Outfitters, which is Department of Labor, and then, but we're guides and outfitters, so we're out there fishing, and I can't speak so much to the hunting outfitter. Perhaps Donna can do that. But the challenges, I guess, is the best way to say it right now, between Fish and Game, or Fish, Wildlife and Parks regulations, and Board of Outfitter regulations. It was interesting years ago, when I first became an outfitter, and Steve can talk to these changes. There was a I would call it a robust MOU between Fish, Wildlife and Parks and Board of Outfitters, and we would get checked for, or inspected, our boats would get inspected, by, it wouldn't be unusual to get inspected by a Board of Outfitters person, and then later on in the afternoon get checked by a Fish, Wildlife and Parks warden, looking at client licenses, things like that, but also looking at, your guide license or your outfitter license. And in Montana, the MOU expired a couple years ago, and there's a real disconnect between I think on the ground Board of Outfitters regulations now and Fish, Wildlife and Parks regulations, and one of the kind of the ones that brought it to a head this year was Board of Outfitters implemented in Montana a new rule for life jackets to be readily available and have a throw bag in your boat. And I could see Lori's like, wow, you guys just got throw bags as a rule? And yeah, we did. So, but the interesting part was it's a Board of Outfitters regulation and not a Fish, Wildlife and Parks regulation. And so when you're out there fishing, the warden might check you. And I said, oh, you want to see my throw bag, or my life jackets are out? And it happened more than once where they said, oh, that's Board of Outfitters. We're not as concerned about that. And it was kind of a unfortunate incident. But I know that at the state level, right, you go up from the ground, now you're at the state level, and still the Board of Outfitters and Fish, Wildlife and Parks has their own challenges in trying to get this MOU across, but the disconnect on the ground is readily apparent, and I think unfortunate. And that's one small example. The other example that's probably more prominent is and Steve can speak to this too, because we're working hard to try and alleviate this, is outfitter and guide reporting requirements. And so I just happen to be looking at my client logs because December's coming up, and we have reporting requirements to the Board of Outfitters, which incorporate, the entire year, and it's different for fishing and it's different for hunting. And then depending on what type of outfitter you are, but several fishing outfitters are permitted through Fish, Wildlife and Parks and have totally different reporting requirements. And Steve is probably gonna laugh, but I remember when Steve got hired on as executive director for the Board of Outfitters. I don't even remember when that was, Steve, years ago, but I was so
5
excited.
or 6.
I said, oh, finally, maybe we can get to one reporting document and send them to both agencies. And we're working hard, but we're still not there yet. And so that's kind of a paperwork sort of aspect, but it affects outfitters certainly and guides in this state. And to get to Donna's point, how do we get to that point, right? How do you get the one agency to work with the other and communicate and talk? And I don't know, from my point of view, we're still struggling to get that implemented. Thanks. That was a
Thank
long-
you, Mike. And I would say to that end that it's still a goal, and it actually, it's not one that isn't seeing fruition because it's been backburnered. It's one because it continues to grow, and it's at some point we talk about systems and technology and data, and concepts get floated now that have grown to the point where it would be a data sharing effort that would involve a mainframe where an outfitter could basically report everything as needed in that spreadsheet column, and then eventually, hopefully, that the different agencies that require that information can get reports from that central area. We'd like to have an MOU with both state, federal, board, everyone kind of get on the same page, and it's something that might be a pipe dream, but it's something I'd like to see happen, because I've been the guy. I've sat in the little tiny office in Wise River and filled out logs and submitted to RUP at FWP, and I've submitted the logs to the board and got a carpal tunnel from it too. So, and does anyone else have any addition, any insight for some of this concept we're talking about?
It looked like Rich had something to share.
Okay.
Yes, thank you. If you talk about us here on Flathead Indian Reservation, the first thing that you guys need to understand is that there is no non-member outfitting allowed within our exterior boundaries of the reservation. We specifically allow tribal members only to do that. And it's not a lot, because our culture, with natural resources is set at a point that you don't benefit, you don't profit from the resources, but we know it occurs, and we do have a fish and game permitting system. So we do utilize some of the capitalistic society of the past, and we get that money to run some of our natural resources programs. And last year, with our fish and game permitting, we were able to generate over $700,000 that was put back into our resources. And most of that goes to our fish and game wardens, which we have 8 of that look at our 1.2 million acres 24/7, or not 24/7, but every day of the week they're working. And what we're finding with outfitters off the reservation is typically they don't understand that they cannot come onto the reservation, because we have a lot of land, Forest Service ground, that borders our reservation, and we're always hearing or getting reports of outfitters coming across that jurisdictional boundary, which is our own tribal lands. And we now own 67% of the reservation. We're slowly buying it back after it was open to homesteading against our wishes back in 1910. So we're a checkerboarded reservation, and the non-members that come and choose to live here, they cannot hunt big game. Even if they own the land, they cannot hunt big game within our exterior boundaries. So they have to leave the reservation. So what we're finding in 2020, is that the communication is getting better. We're We've been having a great working relationship with Montana Fish, Wildlife, and Parks in Kalispell Region 1 and Missoula Region 2, and it's getting better because a lot of our historical land is most of Montana, North Idaho, and parts of Washington. So we have Aboriginal rights where I can go anywhere in Western Montana as long as it's a open and unclaimed land, such as Forest Service or BLM, and hunt in usual and accustomed places. That was given to us by the Hellgate Treaty of 1855, more than 45 years before the state of Montana was even granted statehood. So what I see is that the communication barrier is getting better. We're able to communicate better to where people know that, you know, the outfitting is not something that we allow non-members to do. And typical outfitting, guys, and I'll end with that, is a lot of it is recreation based, floating on the Flathead River below Salish Kootenai Dam, and some fishing like lake trout. So thank you.
Thank you, Rich. I would just add a little to that. If your tribal game wardens do see that Montana licensed outfitter on lands that they're not permitted to be on, please let us know.
Yeah, and
we have a process for that.
Yeah, it's been really good. You know, a lot of times they just might not know exactly where they're at. Right. You know, and we know they don't do it on purpose, the majority of them. But we still have the problems that everybody else does, the poaching, the taking without a license. It's getting a lot better because it's a taking of the resource, right?
Yep. So, well, I might move on to a different but related concept in that I'll posit it like this. Business operators mostly support the need for reporting. We've just talked a little bit about that, and they're often required to report similar data to multiple agencies in various formats, which Mike and I just talked about. So can anyone here can suggest any concepts that would streamline and normalize that reporting process outside of maybe a data dump share mainframe sort of system that I mentioned, including any jurisdictions that could be associated or related to, including our tribal lands, and make it a little bit more streamlined for a business operator to have multiple permits, a license, and we do have a couple of outfitters that are tribal outfitters because they're native and they're also licensed outfitters in the state, so it could impact them as well. And I would just invite anyone that had any concept, any idea for that sort of efficiency if they could share.
All right, I counted to 5. And I see Rory actually is our recreation program manager on the Helena Lewis and Clark, had made a comment there, and it's pretty much right in line with what I've thought and have thought the whole time. Is I'm not quite sure why it's so difficult. I feel like we've had some fits and starts with some things that have worked really well. I know we've had some good luck with filming permits in some regions, and I know that doesn't quite cross over because we don't handle those quite the same, but there are examples out there. Generally, they're more site specific, or a little bit smaller microcosm of an example. But I will say that being at the regional level, I'm generally just helping support the forest, but of course I interact with the other agencies as well, but not as much as I would expect to. And that's on me as much as anyone else. What I have seen in Idaho with Lori and her group, it does seem like there is a little bit more robust, regular communication. And as Lori had referenced, one doesn't happen without the other. So they don't get licensed through the board unless they have a permit. We don't give them a permit unless they have a license. There's a lot more to it than that, even as far as like hunting areas. And, I get less questions and need for explanation from the Idaho side generally than I do in the other areas of the region. And I think that's a big reason why. And I'm not saying it's anything, like I said, it's as much on all the agencies. We're in this modern technology. I mean, we've been forced into it even more so over the last few months. I think it should be doable. You know, obviously there's some barriers. I think some of the strangest ones to me, and maybe it's just because we're in two totally different departments, but the BLM and the Forest Service. I mean, we operate so similar, even though they're interior and we're agriculture. We're both land management agencies. Park Service too, but you know they are a little slightly different, but still in the interior. You know, and I feel like generally we have a more closer working relationship with the states, both Idaho and Montana. And when I was in Utah, same there. And I don't know if that might, I think it just kind of comes from some of that local, you know, local interaction. But, you know, I absolutely understand with what the outfitters are, you know, feeling. And it's like, and I know we're going to get into some of these more, but, you know, whether it's the reporting for just numbers or how we bill our calculation for our bills, I said it would be nice to be able to maybe, I think even Roy said it, I think we need to break down some barriers first because, you know, bureaucracy has built those up over years. We all know that, good, bad, or otherwise. But I think capacity of all of our bandwidth to do so is that. But I mean, I'll be honest, with everything that I've seen that's happened over particularly the last few years, what has caused that to happen is been from the industry pushing it through legislation. And, you know, we look at the GAOA that just passed. You know, we can't, as an agency, the Forest Service, we can't lobby. But, you know, there's a couple of other acts out there, the SOAR Act and the Recreation Not Red Tape Act, that's really focused on that. We've had, you know, the Trails Stewardship Act. Those are all pushed by private sector, you know, the industry, and then we adjust. Not that we're, you know, there's bits and pieces that can make our life a little harder, maybe up front, but it is difficult, I'm going to admit, for us to make some of those changes internally, because generally it has to be nationwide, not even region or forest in a lot of cases.
So if I may, Steve.
Please. Thanks, Lori.
We've just developed a new database with reporting system. And so if an outfitter is sitting on top of a mountain in Idaho, just to give a little background, you use it or you lose it. And each outfitter is assigned a specific worded area description. That area description is then digitized and put on our website. And so a client can go in and say, I want to hunt unit 39, and he can look for all the outfitters in 39, and he can determine where he wants to go based on the maps that we have. But one of the difficulties, and this has been an ongoing talk for the 15 years I've been here, is you're trying to compare apples to oranges. And the reason is the Forest Service BLM, they look at use days. Whereas the licensing board doesn't care about use days, they care about, did you use your area that you have been licensed in? And we do use reviews, because if somebody has an area, they're not using it, then it needs to get gone for someone who can use it. And that's part of our non-use reviews that we do. But we have looked at trying to figure out, and Jeff probably knows, even talking from Carol Hennessy out of the Nez Perce, that they have said, how come we just can't report to one agency for everything? Now, we could if we were asking for the same things, but Fish and Game in Idaho wants to know, what did you harvest? In what area did you harvest it? Was it a bull? Was it a cow? Was it whitetail? Was it mule deer? Was it on the fishing side, how many salmon, how many steelhead? And so Forest Service isn't asking for that. But that doesn't mean that even with our new database that we've just established and we're working on right now, that the outfitter as having the entered in that use, and some of that is looked as proprietary based upon if someone's selling a business, how many use days do they have? How, you know, so that's proprietary. But if all the outfitters were in agreement to say, I will send my use no matter what it is over to the Forest Service through this app, they would have it. But and Jeff, you can correct me if I'm wrong, the situation is we're asking to report 2 different uses.
Thank you, Lori. And that, yeah, that identifies, I think, a lot of the work that would have to be done. That conversation would be significant, but probably, in my opinion, worthy. Is there anyone else who'd like to touch on this?
Well,
Yeah.
Yeah.
Go ahead, Don.
okay. You know, a lot of the reports that we're doing is, some of them are outdated, and some of them you say there's no way to get this information if law enforcement needed it, if other agencies needed it. It'd be good to kind of regroup, change, break it down, as Rory said, and say, why do we need to report this? And what does the BLM need? What does the Board of Outfitters need? What does state land need? And set up these reports as one database so that if they needed to know if it was day use or other types of use, where we were, how many animals were harvested, it would be such an easier process. Right now, if I take one hunter for one day and I cross Forest Service, I cross a little section of state land, I go through BLM for a half hour, all those need to be reported at the end of the year for the one person, one day, plus everything goes to the Board of Outfitters. I have 4 separate reports, and to keep track of all that information, it's just mind-boggling. And we do need responsible reporting to make sure that we as an outfitting industry are doing our job and doing it correctly. But we need reasonable reporting as well.
Thank you, Donna. And I know Mike had something.
Yeah, I think Lori and Donna both hit it right on the head, Steve, and you know this, is that the reasons Board of Outfitters, Montana Board of Outfitters is looking for reporting information is for licensing and qualifications, which is very different from, for example, the big problem in Montana right now is, in reporting, is fishing outfitters report stream and stretch depending on the permitted river they're on. And the Board of, you know, that's on our reporting form of Fish, Wildlife, and Parks, but that's not information that the Board of Outfitters requires. So the disconnect is, you know, the use that the agency is using that information for, and then how to put it in one report. We've been struggling in Montana with it for 11 years, so more than that. And that's the challenge. So we need, for Montana though, I think we need to get the MOU in place first, and then we can worry about what we need to report on the next round.
Excellent.
Yeah, hey, I'll jump in on that a little bit too. You're right, the MOU has been expired for a while, and there's been part of it that was just truly, lack of time to do it. But as I've been working deeper and deeper into these issues and hearing from you guys even more today, it's like, well, what a better time to maybe truly revisit that and make it, a little bit more useful than what we had. And there's probably several others, and I might be referring to a total different one than you are, Mike, but it's just what is the most useful issue? A lot of the stuff that other agencies are collecting you know, our year end is generally more about our billing. And even that is different from what we do in Idaho to what we do in Montana. Montana has we call it flat fee, but it's really a graduated, I can't remember what we call them. We're in the process of trying to reevaluate that right now. You know, that in itself makes it complicated. We're doing it different just within our own agency. So someone like Mike, just within our own agency, you're reporting differently just for that. We do a lot of the other stuff up front when we're doing our needs assessment or some of the NEPA work, which, you know, we don't necessarily need to know harvest rates and that, but we are looking at, you know, what are the impacts of the ground. So there are a lot of those crossovers. It's just, I totally agree. We're doing it for different purposes, but in the end, I think all the information is useful, but some of it is probably outdated. And I'm certainly on the, just talking from my own agency, seeing some ways that we could certainly simplify our, some of our own stuff, let alone, you know, working across those boundaries. And I really like the idea of, like what Donna said is, you know, is it that complicated to come together and just talk through things? Does it happen overnight? Unfortunately, no, it doesn't, but it never will happen if we don't start the conversations.
Thank you. And it reminds me of the thing that guides me quite a bit, and that's progress, not perfection. And with that, and some of this discussion, I think could lead us directly into the next question that thinking up on this panel thought would be a worthy discussion, part of our discussion. And so with this one, I'm gonna ask Lori to go first after I ask this. And so let's just posit it this way, because we did mention the difference between Montana and Idaho, and really there's just an imaginary stripe on a map, on paper map, but in reality there's nothing there. They're different jurisdictions legally, but you know, the trees and the elk don't really recognize that. And in the same, you know, for our neighbors north in Canada and all around Montana, borders many states and provinces. With that, the broad question is with the various states and provinces and jurisdictions and tribal entities, do you have any examples of a jurisdiction that is well balanced in resource and business interests together that could serve as a regional model for a broader licensing and permitting system? And with that, I will just lead off with this, that Montana for commercial outfitting licenses in the pursuit of fish or game. Idaho has a vastly different approach and mission in the impact to the resource and how they permit and license for that. And with that, I'd ask Lori to describe some of that and maybe a little bit of the differences and why Idaho has, you know, takes this approach.
Thanks, Steve. What makes, I think, it work in Idaho is just because there's not an outfitter in a specific area doesn't mean it needs to be outfitted. If it's an easily accessible area, then and the public can get to it, we work with Fish and Game. We ask for Fish and Game's input whenever we license an outfitter for either a new activity or a new opportunity. And if they come back and they say there's really, and NEPA's done, as all of you know, through the Forest Service, you know, is there a needs for it? But we have that conversation with everybody. We ask Fish and Game if there is a need, and if they say, well, for one thing, it is extremely overhunted with the general public, to put an outfitter in there is only going to add more conflict. Therefore, we keep the conflict down by having that discussion and letting the applicant know that it's really not needed in that area. if we do happen to have an applicant ask for a specific area and we speak with Fish and Game, Forest Service, BLM, the other federal agencies that say, you know, that would be a nice place to have an outfitter put in there. And we've had a lot of interest in that. We do what we call a prospectus. And that is an application for everyone who is interested to apply based on a worded area description and the activities and the limitations that Fish and Game feels that should be or should not be placed on the license. So we do it different in Idaho, and that's for anything from zip lining to photo trips to boating, as I'm sure Mike can explain. Idaho goes by river sections, and there's a determined amount of outfitters per river section, whether they're doing float boating, power boating, float boat fishing, walk and wade fishing. It's all determined, and we try and keep the conflict down. We really research if an outfitter's asking for something in particular, if the need is there. And to me, that balances out. It balances out the resources in the area, and it balances out the conflict, which is really important when you're dealing with resident, non-resident hunters and fishermen that don't want to use an outfitter. And of course, outfitters are always accused of taking the best holes and finding the best game and knowing where they're at, because they go out there at 4 in the morning and sit. But trying to do that balance is really important to the licensing board so that the conflicts stay low. And I'm sure that in some of your areas, you probably have a higher conflict based on outfitted use with the public. Is that kind of hit off what you were looking for, Steve?
Absolutely, and thank you. I'm very intrigued by the concept that Idaho licenses ziplining and you know what we call here around here fun floats, where there's no pursuit of fish, but that it's still a licensable activity, an activity of risk outdoors that the state feels is appropriate to you know, keep an eye on and make sure that the people participating in it are safe. So it's intriguing to me, and thank you. Your explanation was spot on for what I was hoping for. And with that, I'd invite anyone to under the broad stroke question of, do you have an example of a jurisdiction that you feel would serve as a good example, and B, if you have any thoughts on specifically Montana's precise permitting of pursuit of fish and game versus the way that Idaho pursues licenses activity. So with that, I'd open it up for any insight.
Well, I'll jump in here. Thanks, Steve. When I read your question, I took it a little differently than the conflict part of it. I took it more as a management a point of view, and if you felt like it was more of a global management or pinpoint in area management. I'll address what I thought the question was more pointed towards, and I do believe we need both. Each, be it Forest Service, BLM, we need the local knowledge on the ground to help with, drought, fire, weather, how many people are using. We have multiple different types of users. Growing up here, was hunting, fishing, horseback riding. Now we have every type of user. So I would say that we need direction on a national level, and we need freedom to trust our local managers and agencies to do the right thing. And I also, as an outfitter, feel many times that we don't want to go out there, and it's not that that's a conflict. It's that we're really the only person, our industry, that's your leash dog. And it's much easier to control a leash dog than it is a lot of people using the resources. Now, I'm not saying we need to control everybody. I'm just saying we need to help with ethics. We need to help with stewardship. And as an outfitter and in the outfitting industry, I take pride in educating my clients, the general public, and helping people out. It's not that it's a conflict issue or a use issue. It's lots of times is a respect issue.
Thank you, Donna. Are there any other
It
thoughts?
looks like,
Oh, no, go ahead, Shannon.
oh, it looks like Rich has his hand raised.
Oh, I'm sorry. Go ahead, Rich.
No, that was from last time, Sheena. Sorry.
It's okay.
I
I'll put your hand
apologize,
down for
Rich.
you.
And we can
Sorry.
back up, Rich, for that too. So what was your idea on the last discussion? We can definitely have that. I apologize for missing.
No, you didn't miss. I was enjoying listening to the discussion from the other panelists, but my hand was raised and I answered the question before, so I'm good.
Excellent. Thank you. Who else? On the
Well, I was
present
just going to
question.
jump in, just to kind of add on to what Donna was alluding to, is just, you know, I think there's a lot of examples. Again, I know I said that local level, but you know, the way that she put that, the direction at the national level and flexibility. Well, I'm not sure if it's flexibility. I was trying to take a note on that local level. And, you know, more than ever, we're feeling that this year. And, you know, I know that a lot of the other topics that have been part of this summit are, you know, COVID related, but, you know, just the enormous increase of use that we've had. And the vast majority of that additional use are, you know, new to all these activities. So that's, you know, we were already in a pretty solid change of use patterns overall. And, you know, I mean, and I think some of our historical policies show that. I mean, Steve, as you were saying with, you know, the licensing alone is just pursuit and, you know, I can't remember how you framed it. I should know it, but versus, yeah, you know, where we as an agency, it's based on more like, you know, commercial use. Well, even that's fairly vague now. And, you know, do we need to be permitting? And I'm saying this from a you know, Forest Service side, you know, that's what we're looking at is, do we need to permit everything that's out there? We don't have the capacity to do that anymore. And then, you know, the snowball starts down the hill of that's then frustrating to folks trying to get a permit. And then our, you know, the way I've always looked at outfitting and guiding is that outfitting and guides are our partners. That's why we do this. You know, that's why we permit. We can't do this internally, but we want people to come and enjoy and understand and learn how to respect and then build that stewardship. And that's a big part of what some of these questions were. And that's, you know, that's part of our mission is, you know, and I feel like we're losing some of that when we don't have that education base. And I absolutely, I mean, you know, the first thing gets cut in our agency is generally conservation ed, interpretation, all of that. Well, that's what outfitter and guides do a great job of. And, you know, people can seek that out. It's the conflicts, I think we're going to be, I think that will be a very, I mean, not that it hasn't always been, but it's going to be continue to raise that bar of what, you know, just the immense use of, and us not being prepared of how to handle that. But, you know, I guess I'm not answering the question per se, but, you know, the stewardship and the land management resources part of that is a critical piece. I mean, very critical piece. That's like, you know, that's what our, our mission is all about. But again, it's working across those lines and, you know, supporting each other, because I think in a lot of cases, our agency ends up falling back more on just that regulatory, policy-driven aspect, and we miss that social aspect. I guess I'll leave it at that.
Okay. And I think to touch base a little bit on that and what Donna had to say was, and it perhaps wasn't clear in the writing, but I think the question as I posited it was what I was thinking at the time was, is a broad brush stroke to the management for the overall benefit of the resource, is it possible, or is it impossible, or would it be possible to have a partial hybrid of broad stroke, area and activity, broad stroke, and then a more pinpointed based on special circumstances of a specific area to be added to and included with? Is that approach beneficial for the resource? Is it beneficial to business? Is it worthy of the discussion to put a team together to try to figure that out? So, does anyone else have any ideas on this portion of our conversation?
Hey, Steve, I'll just add one last thing.
Absolutely.
I'm right there with you. It's, as you know, within our agency, our other resources, that's what that's where we're moving with. Shared stewardship is our mantra lately, and working with the states. And when I say that, I'm talking, whether it's our vegetation management, timber, fire, wildlife management. It's a lot of those other areas have been doing that. And for some reason, I think in my personal opinion is that is generally dealing directly with the resource, where we deal with the recreating public, and they aren't necessarily, they shouldn't be exclusive of each other. And so, I think there's some models maybe from some of those experiences, whether they're collaboratives or, you look at some of the successes that some of the national groups have had of bringing industry partners together from totally different sides of the spectrum. But I do think that's also the complication is, hunting and fishing, we can kind of relate a lot of those together, but now we're looking at, the other 1,000 uses that are out there. But, I think there are some good examples out there. I relate it to some fire suppression efforts. It's almost seamless in some places when it comes to that.
All right. Well, thank you. Does anyone have anything to add on this portion before maybe we move on to we have about 10 minutes and I want to save some time for any closing thoughts, but I have one more kind of broad concept that I want to deposit. And does anyone have anything else on the current? Okay. Well, I will, I'll just throw this one out there as written. And so most advocates, policymakers, public administrators in this arena have a personal connection to stewardship and the value of outdoor recreation. I think most of us are here because we experienced this before our professional lives and grew to love it and appreciate it. And that's kind of why we work within it. So with that, can you provide any insight and how things were, how things currently are, and somewhat of a vision for the future of a balanced use and stewardship for competing resource experiences?
Can I go first?
Rich?
Yeah,
absolutely.
Just briefly, here on a reservation and with our counterparts above and below us, we have a good relationship, but here on the reservation, our tribes look at the resources as something that should be cherished. And I know that's why we're all here. And a lot of times with our tribe, it's difficult to balance that revenue that we generate from people coming here to recreate with the resource, and not impacting the resource, because we're smack dab in the middle of Yellowstone and Glacier Park, Missoula and Kalispell, Montana. So we get a lot of visitation because you have the bison range also here. So people come here And a lot of times they just don't realize where they're at. And with COVID, we saw an influx of people from out of state that came here and were setting up camp, and we had to remove them. But that's the biggest challenge I see with permitting fishing, permitting recreation, and permitting bird hunting here on the reservation, is just that balance. I mean, how much is too much? And I think our parks are seeing that same thing. And you know, what we've done is, at least last year, we hired some young game wardens that were, you know, were energetic, and that's why we saw our revenue go up. There was more compliance with purchasing of licenses and things like that. But that's just my thought. Thank you.
Thank you. And Rich, I'll just say that reminds me of a concept that I was exposed to in the legislature, and it was from a Native American legislator who gave me the idea that it was not her land. She was borrowing it from her grandkids, and that is a beautiful concept to me, and has been a guiding light in how I approach this with my son, and it's been very important since I learned that. So,
and we're not without conflicts. I mean, Flathead Lake, you know, the largest lake in the west of the Mississippi, half of it's on a reservation. And so there are conflicts with some fishing guides up in the north part of the lake that, you know, go out and for profit, they allow people to fish on their boats to catch lake trout. They cannot come on our side because, you know, we believe it's a non-native fish. We're trying to reduce those numbers, but you know, they want to keep the numbers higher. And so there's always conflict. And so far, you know, we listen to each other, we understand, but we just don't share the same feelings when it comes to that. But thank you.
Thank you. Yeah, who's next? Who's next on this concept of how things were maybe when you were young, and being introduced to your passion for the outdoors, and what you think current states are, and a vision for our future?
Okay, I'm going to make it quick because I've taken way too much time here, but I was absolutely raised that way. You know, I was born and raised in Salt Lake, and just the incredible growth that I was just down there visiting family last week, and it's mind-boggling. And we're going to expect that's not going to stop. And you know, I was lucky enough to have a pretty, you know, open area to just run around in, and anytime we had any spare time, we were skiing, fishing, hiking, just exploring that. I thought that's just what we did, and the respect for those resources and those opportunities, I don't remember being taught them, like, you know, specifically, you know, like, well, this is why, this is why, this is why. It was just sort of almost like a, you know, inbred sort of respect. And it wasn't until I was quite a bit older when I started kind of paying attention that not everybody did that. And, you know, that's what I feel. And of course, I know we all have, of watching that sort of respect, and just, you know, even, okay, maybe things got, you know, they didn't have to be managed as much. Granted, you know, just the sheer number of people using it is kind of where we've got, but it's just the kind of where we lost that being sort of a core value of everything that we do, and not just in urbanized areas. I see it. I mean, I think it's a particular problem there, but you know, I went out for a hike with some family that was visiting from California, and they just couldn't believe how, you know, just they were blown away. It's like the first time they've been out of California, which is crazy to me. But to me, I was walking along a pretty heavily used trail with, you know, graffiti on the trees and carved in, and I was like, what is going on here? And then, you know, just the immense increase in impacts that we've seen this year, again, going back to what I said before with the new users. And it's, you know, we want to welcome them, but it's an education factor, which we don't have very good, or we have different things. I think that's another area that, you know, where we talk about coming together on permitting stuff. If anything, that's an even better arena to come together on, is our messaging, getting that word out, our education. you know, and that includes the outfitters as well, because that's a lot of time where people are getting that information from for the very first time because they want to experience it, but they don't know how. That's what we're doing here. And, you know, that's where I would see, I think it was, correct me if I'm wrong, Steve, maybe it's the Montana Tourism Board or agency, but they had some great messages of that, you know, advertising of, we want you here, we can't wait to have you here, but not now. You know, like we're ready for you when it's time. And, you know, I was looking at it like, wow, that's great. Most of our advertising is Smokey Bear, which is also good, but we rarely, if ever, have any sort of, you know, either stewardship, outdoor recreation, or, you know, just respect of nature sort of advertising in a bigger sense. You know, I mean, of course we have it on bulletin boards and such, but.
Thank you.
Steve, if I may.
Yeah, please, Lori.
We talked about the way it was and the way it is now. When I was a kid, I remember going out and we'd go along up by Atlanta, if anybody knows where that's at. And gosh, we'd go camping. You wouldn't see anybody forever. And you'd get in groups with families. And I remember going out fishing and Dad said, okay, just remember you eat what you catch. Well, we all, you know, 5, 6 of us kids went out and we went on a fishing expedition and we all caught our limit. What I didn't realize when he said you eat what you catch means you eat all of what you catch. And so if you caught 14 fish, that's what you're going to eat until those fish are gone. So I learned a real quick lesson when I was young on management. To this day, I do not like fish, but I learned my lesson. But one of the things that I think has changed is recreation and enjoyment versus going to the forest to live because I don't have anywhere else to go. And I know that when the COVID hit, I was on the governor's working group, and the problems that were happening in the forest, BLM, Department of Lands, was they were being inundated with campers, and these people were staying their 14-day limit and then moving 3 camps down and leaving all their garbage. They weren't there because they wanted to enjoy the resource. They were there because they had nowhere else to go or they had nothing else to do. So like I said, born and raised Idaho, spent all my time out in the outdoors, and there's such a, as Jeff said, a disrespect to nature now than there ever was when I was growing up. You left it better than you found it. And that's just not happening. And I don't know if economics will change that back when people get back to work, but it's just been overwhelming to our forests, and they've closed down a lot of the hot springs because people are just living there and leaving garbage, and it's no longer manageable.
Well, thank you, Lori. I think you hit the nail on the head with, it wouldn't have been a complete discussion without even the mention of that or the impact of COVID on our resources. And I'll just say that where I recreate is very remote. And this year when I saw my first pile of dirty diapers on the side of the road, 50 miles from the closest gas station, I was fired up. I was mad. And so those are things that I think we're going to have to continue to focus on and keep aware of the impacts that COVID had beyond the health impact of it, the human impact, but what is its health to resource impact as well. I know we have quite a few other people, and I'm very interested in your how it was, what it's like, and what's your vision of the future. If anyone else wants to jump in.
Well, both Lori and Steve and Jeff, what great comments. And as we move forward, we are facing new problems, new issues. But I also believe that we need right now to be the generation that helps educate, that helps move forward, that helps put stewardship as our front and it doesn't matter if they're guided. It doesn't matter if they're unguided. We have a responsibility if we're going to use the natural resources to preserve it. There are some tremendous organizations out there. There are some tremendous people. And you know, I think it's just time that we all got together and took care of those things. And when I grew up, I followed my dad around, of course. I mean, what a tremendous opportunity as a child to never see anybody in the mountains, to be able to hike all day. But gosh darn it, they had those Willys Jeeps and they drove all over the place, you know, and there wasn't the wildlife population there is today. So it's not, we may be living in the good old days right now. Our population, the management that the Forest Service, the BLM, the different agencies have put forward. I mean, I think we have a great start to right now be the generation to make a difference.
Thank you. That's a profound statement that we may be in the good old days right now. That's very, very thought provoking. It reminds me, I guess, it's hard to put the paste back in the tube too, you know, let's move forward. Who else? I know we're, oh yeah.
So some of this, interestingly, there's two parts. The first is this idea, the idea of guiding for the future, our advanced guide school, was that the impetus came from the PKD outbreak in Yellowstone, where a couple of our outfitters were, you know, at the local watering hole hearing about 3 or 4 different guides spewing 3 or 4 different reasons for the PKD outbreak. And for here in Montana, that was a new, unique outbreak, although the organism has been here for forever. And so the impetus was, hey, how do we take these more advanced guides that know the basics of guiding, but teach them more of the science behind some of these conservation stewardship aspects, and that was the impetus for the entire Guiding for the Future program. And now it's, you know, we're going statewide. And the idea that, you know, the effects of COVID, one of the things that happened in Montana, and Idaho as well, is anybody with a drift boat is one of those dang guides, right? They're guides and outfitters are taking over the rivers. They're everywhere. And well, lo and behold, on the Madison River and also on the South Fork of the Snake, I'm not as familiar with the Boise area, but you know, when you start actually counting the boats and seeing who's who, outfitters on the Madison are 13% of the overall use. And I think on the South Fork, it was certainly less than 20% of the overall use. And not everybody with a cool truck and a cool boat is a guide or an outfitter. And so that's the first thing. And then what really happened was, and I know this was the effect in Idaho as well, because I was pretty close with the Idaho Guides Association, is low around April and May in Montana, we were under strict, you know, 2-week quarantine guidelines, and guiding and outfitting was a non-essential business. So there were no guides and outfitters out there, and there were no non-residents coming from California and Utah to you know, be outfitted. And the recreation use on the Madison River was through the roof. It was the most used period. The first quarter of 2020 was the most used period on the Madison that they'd seen. And lo and behold, it was you know, Montana residents discovering, probably because they couldn't go anywhere else, they couldn't go to Idaho, that, hey, let's explore our own state. And And that's, the same thing happened with you, Steve, and your, diapers up in the middle of nowhere. I think every river was like that, but so where I'm going with this is kind of what Donna alluded to was I agree too, that I think we are in the good old days, especially fish numbers and wildlife numbers across the landscape, and the actual few numbers of guides and outfitters that are actually on the landscape, and how do you then teach this stewardship, conservation ethic, right, from Aldo Leopold to those that are coming here and using it. And one big aspect of that is, and I have said this for years, is you behave like where you're from. So if you're coming out of the Provo area on around Salt Lake, or you're used to fishing the Provo River, and then you come to the Big Hole, jumping in next to somebody is not unusual, right? So the ethics coming from where you're at are different than where you're going to, and it, part of the education is, hey, if you're on the Big Hole and you see a car, you should probably just keep going because it's already too crowded, right? But how do you implement that across the landscape? And I think that's the struggle. But thanks.
Well, thank you. And thank everyone for your participation today. If it was on the panel or if you joined in, I would say I'd also like to, appreciate everyone who put on this conference and say thank you for inviting me to moderate today's conversation. It really has spurred a lot of question and interest and energy. Donna posited some questions, and some ideas about sitting around the fire, and all I'll say to conclude today's conversation is I'm in and I'm energized, and this whole concept topic discussion was fuel for that, and will continue to do so. So I think based on the parameters of our technology, that does conclude our conversation. I want to thank everyone again for serving on the panel, and that will conclude this panel, and look forward to seeing a video of it on the site soon, probably tomorrow. Thank you all again very, very much.
Thank you, Steve.
Thank you. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.